Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Todd, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing my disability story with you so that you can have that background on me and my journey before watching the rest of my videos. I'm going to start by clearing up my name. So my full name is Todd, but my first name is not Sarah. I never go by Sarah and never have. My first name is Sarah Todd. So I have a double name. I also go by ST as a nickname sometimes. So Sarah Todd or ST is my first name, and then Hammer is my last name. All right, diving right into it, let's get into my disability story. So in 2010, when I was 8 years old, I became paralyzed from the neck down. Now, a lot of people get confused when I say that I became paralyzed from the neck down, but I am clearly moving my arms a little bit. So it is possible to make a recovery after paralysis. Everyone's situation is different, so I made a partial recovery, and I will get into that a little bit later. So on April 19th, 2010, I became paralyzed from the neck down out of nowhere. I was 8 years old at the time, and everything was completely normal. I did not have any symptoms prior to this happening until I got a really bad head and neck ache in the middle of my ballet class. So I was an avid dancer, loved ballet. It was my greatest passion, and I was so excited to be at ballet that day after school because we were trying on our recital costumes and I could not wait to try on my costume. So my friend and I were just dancing around the dance studio in our costumes, having fun, when I all of a sudden just got this excruciating head and neck ache. It was literally the worst pain that I'd ever felt in my life. And the pain got so bad to the point that I was crying, which was very unusual for me because I loved being at dance class and I never really cried over anything like that. So my dance teacher went and got my mom, and she came into the room and she decided that she was going to take me home to rest. So I took my dance costume off and we went outside of the studio, and I was sitting down on a bench and I was putting on my clothes over my leotard and tights so that we could go to the car. And I was reaching down to adjust my tights to do that. And all of a sudden, my arms and hands just stopped working out of nowhere. They were completely paralyzed at my sides. I couldn't move them at all. So I turned to my mom and I was like, "Mom, I can't move my arms." And obviously, we did not go home after that. She was immediately freaking out, and we were a long distance away from the nearest hospital. And it was peak traffic time, so it would have taken us forever to get there. So we went to the nearest urgent care center. My mom had to buckle me into the car because I couldn't move my arms and hands. And I was crying the whole way there because I was so scared and my head and neck were hurting so bad. But by the time we got to the urgent care center, which was only about 10 minutes later, I went to get out of the car and my knees just buckled under me. I couldn't walk, but I could still move my legs. So probably by this time I was losing strength in my core, and that's probably why I couldn't walk, but I could still move my legs. So my mom picked me up and carried me inside to the urgent care, obviously freaking out. And she went to the person at the desk and told them that I couldn't move my arms. I had a really bad head and neck ache, and they immediately took me back to a room. I remember they were giving me an IV and they were setting me up to be transported by helicopter to the nearest children's hospital. So I was very quickly transported by helicopter to the nearest hospital. And once we got there, I was taken into the emergency room immediately. And I was put in a room and I was seen by a doctor. But I proceeded to be in that emergency room for 6 hours, where I received no treatment except for Motrin for my head and neck pain, and no tests were run. So the doctor that saw me didn't believe that anything was actually wrong. He thought that I was faking it and making the whole thing up. And I distinctly remember while I was lying down on a bed, he lifted my arm above my head and then let it go. And he said that since my arm didn't hit my face, I had control over it, and so I was faking it. And he also brought in a child life specialist, and they put a popsicle in my hand, and they kept trying to use the popsicle to coax me to move. And it was one of those popsicles that's like in the plastic sleeve, so they're really cold when you touch those popsicles. and I couldn't feel that the popsicle was cold. And my mom kept telling them that I couldn't feel that the popsicle was cold, but they literally just kept saying, if you move your arm, that's your ticket out of here. So they totally didn't think that anything was wrong. My mom was begging and pleading with the doctor in the hallway for hours, begging him to do something, throwing out possible diagnoses at him, asking him if I had MS, if I had a stroke, if I had a brain tumor, etc. But he just kept saying no, and he refused to do anything. And she was also asking for a new doctor, but nothing changed. So my mom obviously felt incredibly helpless because she could not make this doctor do anything. And she said that she was begging him and pleading with him so much to the point that she felt like she was being incredibly rude. So after all of this had happened, we'd been there for 6 hours, like I said, and it got very late at night. So eventually the doctor told my mom, if she's not significantly better in the morning, bring her back. And I was discharged from the ER. And when you're discharged from a hospital, like they make you leave. Like you can't just stay. They literally basically kick you out of the hospital. So we were forced to leave the hospital against our will. And we even had to ask for a wheelchair to be brought to me for me to be able to leave the hospital because I couldn't walk. They did not just provide that for us. We literally had to ask. So a nurse brought a wheelchair and my mom helped me get in the wheelchair and we drove home. Obviously, we should have been able to trust the doctor that I would be significantly better in the morning. I was so excited for the morning to come because I was like, okay, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be normal. But my hopes were immediately crushed when I woke up the next morning because not only were my arms and hands still paralyzed, I also couldn't move my legs now either. So I was completely paralyzed from the neck down. I had gotten worse overnight, and all of this had happened in the span of like 16 hours. So all of this had happened so suddenly, out of nowhere, and really fast. So my mom immediately called for an ambulance, and I was taken back to the same hospital by ambulance. But when we were driving there, we literally had to ask them to turn the sirens on. They were just driving in the morning traffic without the sirens on, which was absolutely absurd. So we asked them to turn the sirens on, and then they did, and we got back to the same hospital, same emergency room. But thankfully I was seen by a different doctor this time who immediately ran tests. I had an MRI and a spinal tap done, and the MRI revealed spinal cord damage from C2 to T1 on my spinal cord. So I had a very extensive portion of my spinal cord damaged just out of the blue. And I was diagnosed with transverse myelitis, or TM for short, which is an autoimmune condition that results in spinal cord damage. But in 2018, I was actually re-diagnosed with acute flaccid myelitis, or AFM for short, which is not autoimmune. It is a neuroimmunological condition that is caused by a virus attacking the spinal cord. And AFM is pretty complicated. I have some videos on my page going into a deeper dive that gets pretty neurological and scientific on AFM, but if you're interested in that, I will link it at the top of this video and you can head on over there and watch that. So anyway, after I got my diagnosis, I remained in the hospital for 2 months. I was in the ICU for 12 days because I had reduced lung function. My breathing wasn't very good, so they were monitoring me to see if I needed to be put on a ventilator, but I never did, thankfully. And while I was in the ICU for 12 days, I had plasmapheresis treatment done because they first started with steroids and the steroids didn't help at all. So we quickly moved to plasmapheresis treatment. It was this big machine that came into my room with a woman from the Red Cross, and I had a few treatments of plasmapheresis, and that seemed to help because after the first treatment, I moved my big toe. So the plasmapheresis treatment helped me regain the movement in my legs pretty much. So after the 12 days in the ICU and the plasmapheresis treatment, I spent the rest of my time in the hospital in the inpatient rehab unit. So that is where I regained a lot of my strength. I ended up being able to push a wheelchair with my legs since I couldn't do it with my arms. And that is what allowed me to really build up my leg strength. I also did a ton of physical therapy and occupational therapy, and I did regain a little bit of movement in my arms and hands, but not much. So once I went home in June of 2010, 2 months after arriving in the hospital, I walked out of the hospital with some assistance, but I never used a wheelchair, a walker, or a cane again after leaving the hospital. I did regain some strength in my arms and hands after leaving the hospital, but I feel like pretty much since about 2012, my arms and hands have remained the same. So where I am today with that is I can't lift my arms up higher than this, so my shoulders really don't work very well. I can't move my left hand at all. It is completely paralyzed. I can move my right hand, but it is very weak and my thumb doesn't really work. So you can see I can't really move all of my fingers out completely, and I can't do a thumbs up. So my thumb is very weak. So I am living with a permanent physical disability, and I've been on a really long but great disability identity development journey. It took me a while to get there. I feel like for the first few years after becoming disabled, I was kind of mourning my pre-disabled life and really struggling with all the adjustments I had to make. I did not immediately go back to school. Like, I went home from the hospital in June of 2010. Then I was doing a program called Day Rehab where I did physical and occupational therapy for hours every day of the week. And then once I moved on from that in July of 2010, I was doing 3 hours of physical and occupational therapy a day at an outpatient center. So to focus on physical and occupational therapy, I was homeschooled for third grade. So my third grade teacher actually came to my house 2 days a week and taught me third grade. So I didn't go back to school again until over a year after becoming disabled. And when I did, I had a full-time aide with me for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, which was a huge adjustment because she was with me all day, every day at school. And that was just a lot to adjust to. And then just also relearning how to do things and regaining independence. I had to do that, and that was a really long journey, but I found a lot of ways to do things for myself, which I often share on my channel here. And I also ended up having to have a spinal fusion surgery in 2016 when I was 14 years old, because since my muscles were so weak in my neck, I was essentially holding my neck up crooked, so like kind of like this. And so my neck grew crooked, and I had really extensive cervical scoliosis. I can put in a screenshot of my x-ray here. You can see that my neck was so crooked. It was like an 80-degree scoliosis. So really, really bad. So I had a spinal fusion surgery done in August 2016 at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and my spine was fused from C4 to L1, so a really extensive fusion. And that recovery was months long. I had to miss basically the whole first term of 9th grade, and that was a lot. So I have this scar here from that, and then one down my neck and back, and that was a really big deal. So I am not without medical complications because of AFM. I'm not simply just living with paralysis. Like, I had the scoliosis, which came with a ton of pain, and now that pain is a lot better, but I do now have the spinal fusion. So that kind of reduced my movement a little bit in terms of being able to move my neck from side to side. I also still do have reduced lung function, and I do get fatigued more easily if I'm walking around. I also have impaired body temperature regulation, so I get really hot really easily and really cold really easily. So when it's only just like in the 40s and 50s, not even that cold, my hands will be numb and my feet will be numb, and that makes it so I can't move my right hand as well. And then also in the heat, I get hot so easily, and a lot of people with spinal cord injuries don't sweat. Thankfully, I am able to sweat to cool my body down, but I still overheat, and it can be really dangerous for me. So essentially, that is where I am now. I am not expected to recover any more than I have now, and I have accepted that and am perfectly okay with that because I have made a lot of progress in my disability identity journey, as I mentioned earlier. So I have gotten involved in disability advocacy work and really built a life around doing this work as a career and just really wanting to do good for the disability community. So I wrote and published my first book when I was 11 years old with my best friend who has a similar disability to me. It was an autobiography about our disability journeys, and we wrote and published 2 more books. So we have 3 books together, and that's what got me involved in disability advocacy so early on in my life. I began writing about my disability journey in a lot of magazines for different news publications, and that led me to doing public speaking and consulting work professionally. So I public speak at different schools. I've done some speaking engagements at various colleges. I've spoken at my high school, and I've also spoken for different companies as well to their employee resource groups typically. So that has been wonderful, having the opportunity to do that and build a career around this work. I also have been doing social media work since March 2020 when COVID hit. I really started building up my social media platform since then. So I'm here on YouTube. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, and I really just enjoy using social media as a form of education and awareness. And it's just really fun. So that's my fun side hustle. I went to college in August 2020. I went to Davidson College, and I graduated from there in May of this year, in May 2024, with a degree in psychology and communication studies. And I'm now working in corporate America in diversity, equity, and inclusion, doing accessibility and disability inclusion work. So I have a full-time job in addition to doing my public speaking and consulting and social media work specific to disability. I also just want to clear up that it was a mere coincidence that I was at ballet class when I got AFM. Me doing ballet has nothing to do with why I got AFM. So just want to clear that up, and also mention that nobody really knows why certain people get AFM. It is mostly children who get it because it is caused by a virus, which is typically a cold virus. Somehow that virus is just able to weave its way into the spinal cord and cause damage, but we don't know why I got AFM. It's honestly just probably bad luck. And that's just what happened to me. So there's not really much of an answer to that question. So anyway, that is my disability story. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope that you all enjoyed this video and will check out a lot of the other videos on my page. And thank you all so much for being here. Bye.